And welcome to the National Museum, United States Navy. Dr. John Sherwood, Department of the Navy civilian historian with contemporary military history experience. Current research focus on humanitarian and disaster release operations.
Hello, my name is John Sherwood, and I am a historian with the Naval History and Heritage Command. And today I will be talking about U.S. Navy and coastal and riverine warfare in Vietnam, 1965 to 1968. Before I delve into that topic, however, I want to give folks an idea of the scale and scope of the Navy's activity in Vietnam. The Navy deployed a total of 17 aircraft carriers to Vietnam, and those carriers made 73 cruises lasting over 8,000 days. Navy and Marine aircraft dropped approximately 1.5 million tons of bombs during the Vietnam War. That's about a quarter of all tonnage dropped by American air power during the war. The Navy lost 531 fixed-wing aircraft and suffered 299 losses through accidents. In addition to carrier operations, the Navy played a huge role. Logistics, much of the supplies for the war, about 99% of ammunition and fuel and 95% of other supplies were supplied by the ships of the Military Sea Transportation Command, now known as MSC. An additional task force, TF-73, labored to keep the fleet's warships on station in Vietnam. And we also had logistics activities within the country of South Vietnam. I'll talk about them a bit later. Naval gunfire, we had gunfire support. We had cruisers and destroyers ranging up the coast of North and South Vietnam, providing sea-based artillery for American Marines and American soldiers and South Vietnamese soldiers in Vietnam. We had coastal and riverine task forces. We had advisors. We had Navy construction. We had salvage, medical. So the Navy was involved in multiple arenas in Vietnam. But today what I want to talk about is what we call the in-country task forces, which fell under Commander Naval Forces Vietnam, or COMNAV-4V for short. Pictured here is the first COMNAV-4V, Norvell Ward, who was a 1937 Naval Academy graduate, and incidentally a highly decorated submariner from World War II. Now within his command were the three inshore operational task forces, which I will discuss later, naval support activities. These were the in-country logistics organizations of the Navy, and they supplied the Marines and other forces with everything from beans to Band-Aids. Naval support activity Da Nang became the largest overseas logistics command in the Navy at its height. It had 4,000 naval personnel attached to it. And these naval support activity sailors often came under fire, delivering supplies by LCMs up rivers. During the Tet Offensive in the Mekong Delta, a number of these installations were attacked, and the naval support activities took up arms and defended their positions along with other sailors. There were Seabees, which grew from 1 battalion to over 10,000 sailors by the end of the war. We had a naval advisory group that essentially built the South Vietnamese Navy from scratch. And we had special operations, salvage, communications, civic action, PSYOPs, intelligence. We had both intelligence within South Vietnam, those were the NILOs, and also the maritime surveillance planes associated with maritime. And then we had overhead surveillance in North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, provided by fixed-wing aircraft as well. So a huge huge effort there on behalf of the Navy. First inshore task force, operational task force that was established was Maritime. Maritime was established in reaction to the discovery of a 100-ton trawler at Vung Ro Bay in the middle of South Vietnam on 16 February 1965. The discovery of this trawler laden with war supplies indicated that the sea was a very significant means for infiltrating supplies into South Vietnam, and if the South Vietnamese were going to win the war, that seaborne route had to be shut down. Hence the operation Maritime. It was based on a barrier system, and I'll turn to the next slide. You can see there are 3 barriers. There was an outer barrier, which was patrolled by these maritime surveillance aircraft, or maritime patrol aircraft, such as the SP-2 and later the P-3. There were large warships, DERs, destroyer escort radar, high-endurance cutters. The middle barrier was a South Vietnamese patrolled barrier of the mainly vessels of the South Vietnamese Coastal Force, and the inner barrier consisted of interceptors. That was meant to intercept anything that got into the territorial waters of South Vietnam, so 12 nautical miles. This whole system was augmented by a series of shore bases, shore-based radar installations, command centers. It was a very elaborate system, and once it was stood up, nothing steel could get through. The radars, the maritime surveillance aircraft, as well as the shore-based radar would pick a contact up that was steel. That contact would be tracked, and if that contact tried to penetrate South Vietnamese waters, it would be intercepted, period. Very successful, and the main interceptor for the Navy was the PCF Swift boat, which was it was a 50-foot aluminum craft manufactured by Stewart Seacraft of Berwick, Louisiana. It was originally designed to get oil workers to offshore rigs in a hurry. It could go 28 knots, and really all the Navy did with this vessel was to install an excellent radar, 50 caliber machine guns, 81 millimeter mortar, and voila, you had a militarized vessel that could intercept trawlers attempting to breach South Vietnamese waters. It also took place in Maritime, and it deployed WPB cutters, which were slightly larger. It was very effective. Why so effective? It was nearly impossible for anything made of steel to infiltrate. The interceptors, both the WPBs and the PCFs, were commanded by very aggressive junior officers. If you happen to be at the Coast Guard Academy, I would encourage you to go to the Hall of Heroes, and you will see numerous guys like this guy in the next slide, Charles Mosher, who were involved in these trawler intercepts and received, in many cases, silver stars as a consequence. Mosher here is congratulating Commissaryman Second Class William N. Kepler for his efforts in a trawler intercept. He received a Purple Heart because he was wounded. And I bring this up to honor Kepler, but also to note that he was a commissaryman. You would think that these types of jobs would mainly go to gunner's mates and bosun's mates, but these small boat positions attracted all sorts of different ratings. To get there, you had to volunteer twice. You had to volunteer for the Navy or the Coast Guard, and then you had to volunteer for service in Vietnam. So a lot of the movies portray American servicemen in Vietnam as losers. The people who ended up in our Brownwater force were an elite or quasi-elite force of personnel. The next operational task force that was established was the Game Warden Task Force, Task Force 116. It was established in December of 1965. It was designed to bring the war to the rivers, mainly to patrol the major rivers of the Mekong Delta, which I'll show you in the next slide, search suspicious river craft, keep the shipping channels open, and basically establish government control along the major waterways of the Mekong Delta. 5 divisions, each with 20 patrol boats, comprised this task force. Plus there were SEALs, plus there was a large light helicopter squadron called HAL-3. They flew UH-1 gunships. I'll show you this slide of the Mekong Delta. The major operational areas for TF-116 were the Bosok River, the Cochin, the Hamlong, the Mito, or Mita as it's pronounced, and the Saigon River. Those were the big bodies of water. And the Saigon River in particular was very, very important in terms of getting supplies to Saigon. There was a swamp in between called the Rungsat Swamp, or the Forest of the Assassins, as it was called. And it was a place where there were numerous Viet Cong, and they would ambush large merchant vessels trying to get to Saigon, not only from the shore with RPGs and the like, but also mining. And TF-116 actually deployed minesweepers on the Saigon River as well to keep that channel open. And those wooden holes, iron men, those were very brave sailors who were on those minesweepers. They were wooden and very lightly armed. But the sort of the capital ship of the Riverine River Patrol Force was the PBR. And this was another bit of off-the-shelf technology that the Navy militarized for Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, the Navy was very much focused on the Cold War struggle with the Soviet Union, and was focused on blue water operations, did not want to spend a lot of money developing inshore forces for Vietnam. So there was a lot of innovation involved in keeping it low cost, but yet effective. The PBR was essentially a 31-foot uniflight cruiser, which was manufactured in Bellingham, Washington. And what the Navy did was it put 2 General Motors, 216 horsepower diesel engines in that boat, powerful, and removed the screws and put in a jacuzzi water jet propulsion system. And while many boats today have water jets, they were revolutionary at the time. It allowed the PBR to travel in very shallow water, to go backwards and forwards without turning around, to skip over sandbars, to spin like a top, so you could put fire anywhere 360 degrees around that boat. Very, very effective river patrol craft, and they could go very fast, and they were cheap. About $75,000 was the original cost of these boats. Some of our bases were on land, and this is Sadek, taken in '67. Many co-located with Vietnam Navy River Force bases. But the biggest basing innovation was sea basing, or river basing. And here you see Harnett County. It's an LST 821. And the beauty of the LST, not only was it mobile, it could get anywhere as long as there was enough water, but it had a flight deck. So usually 2 helicopters from HAL-3 were stationed on each LST, and they provided the PBR forces with scouting capability and also mobile firepower. They were really the guardian angels for the PBRs on the waterways, and a real force multiplier for the PBRs. But it was more than that. The LSTs could offer maintenance facilities, state-of-the-art maintenance facilities. It could offer sailors who had been out in the hot, humid jungle climate a place to dry out, cool off. They were modestly air-conditioned, and one of the biggest advantages was chow. Sailors, Riverine sailors could go in and have a really nice Navy meal and didn't have to survive solely on canned rations. So here's a PBR searching sampans. There were thousands of sampans on the rivers. There was absolutely no way that 120 PBRs could search every sampan. So it was limited in its effectiveness in halting the spread of enemy supplies on the inland rivers, but of course that really wasn't the goal of the operation. It was to establish government control of the rivers, and that it did. It secured those rivers. It succeeded in frustrating numerous Viet Cong river crossings. It upset their logistics system because they had trouble moving things across the big rivers. And in some cases, we caught them attempting a large river crossing, and one of our most famous sailors received a Medal of Honor, James Elliott Williams. We have a DGG today named after Williams. The final inshore task force that was established was the Mobile Riverine Force, part of General Westmoreland's strategy of seeking out and destroying large enemy formations throughout the country. Now, an air mobile division might have been a better choice for the Delta, but there simply weren't enough helicopters to go around. So because there were so many rivers, over 4,000 miles of navigable waterways, it was decided that the Navy would provide modified landing craft, World War II landing craft, and that the fighting component, the ground fighting component, because the Navy fought as well, was the 9th Infantry Division, a brigade of the 9th Infantry Division. And you ask yourself, why didn't the Marines deploy with the Mobile Riverine Force? Isn't that more to their, more related to the function of being a Marine? Well, the bottom line is the Marine Corps was pretty tied up in I Corps, which was the largest tactical zone, and it was right on the border. It had always been one of the hottest tactical zones in terms of the fight, and the Mekong River tactical zones, 3 and 4 Corps, were Army zones. So hence the marriage of Army and Navy components to form the Mobile Riverine Force. The Navy component consisted of 2 river squadrons, each with 45 modified landing craft. The heart and soul of the Mobile Riverine Force were what they call armored troop transports, ATCs, or alpha boats, as they were often referred to by the men of the MRF. The usual armament consisted of one 20mm gun and 2 50 calibers, 4 30 calibers, and 2 Mark 18 grenade launchers. And what an ATC was a modified World War II LCM-6 landing craft. And all the Navy did was provided more armor for those landing crafts, provided more armament, and voila, you had a river assault craft. Unlike the PBR and the PCF, these LCMs were quite slow. They could only travel up to 8 knots, and often they traveled slower than that. And that posed a problem in the Mekong Delta, because the Mekong Delta has very strong tides and very strong currents, and it has low bridges. So it was very easy to either be steaming against tide and current, not going anywhere, or getting into an area and the tide comes in and then you can't get out because there's a low bridge. So those were all factors that had to go into the careful planning of these operations. Another unique aspect of the MRF were command relationships. Here's the Bert David, who was the 9th ID commander, with Robert Salzer, the Navy component commander, during the Tet Offensive. And basically the way the command structure worked is that when the MRF, when the soldiers and the Navy were on the river steaming somewhere, it was under Navy command. As soon as the Army component disembarked, the whole force went under Army command, and those ATCs, there were also monitors, which were really the gunboats. They had a 40 millimeter cannon. They also had, some of them had flamethrowers, mortars, those types of things. Those became essentially the MRF's tanks, waterborne tanks, whereas the ATCs are more of their, waterborne armored personnel carriers. So that's how it worked. This amphibious doctrine went back to World War II, and there was really not much friction because the lower level commanders all the way up to 06 got along very well. There was only one base for the MRF. It was just north of Metah on the Mekong Delta. It was the largest reclamation project in the world at the time. 2 huge dredgers were brought in, one of which, Jamaica Bay, was actually attacked during the dredging of this base. General Westmoreland didn't want to seize land from the Vietnamese citizens. He wanted to build this thing on reclaimed land for political reasons. And the unique feature of this base is that huge turning basin that you see there. And what that allowed for is multiple ATCs loading or unloading at the same time. And that sped up operations. There was also sea basing, LSTs, and barracks barges. I should point out that in terms of loss of life, some of the most tragic events occurred when these LSTs were mined, often by combat swimmers. And the Westchester County suffered an attack, as did YRBM 16, another barracks barge. And so they were vulnerable. They also had guns themselves, and during the Tet Offensive, some of the LSTs actually provided gunfire support to troops in contact on the ground. The MRF results killed more Viet Cong than any inshore unit, suffered the highest casualties. The boats, well, in terms of casualties, 115 sailors were killed, over 2,600 soldiers. They killed more Viet Cong, as I said, than any inshore unit. The boats themselves could eventually prove vulnerable to anti-tank rockets that were deployed with the Viet Cong, that fired armor-penetrating rockets. One of the things that I did not mention that was a big asset for the MRF is that whenever troops disembarked in the Delta, they got wet. Okay, typically up to their waist in water and mud. And because of a fungal infection called paddyfoot, you could only survive in that kind of environment for about 24 hours before you were essentially combat ineffective. So the fact that these sea bases and also the troop transports provided a place for these soldiers to dry out was very, very important during the course of the war. The high point of the MRF was the Tet Offensive in 1968. That's also the point where my book ends. And according to General Westmoreland, the MRF saved the Delta. And how it saved the Delta is all of the major cities and towns in the Delta were either captured or fell under siege from the Viet Cong, and the MRF steamed out of its base and relieved each siege or recaptured each town in short order, starting with Mita, then moving it to Ben Tre, then Ben Long, Canto, etc. The keys to the success of the MRF were its mobility, its firepower, logistics. The infantry require a lot of ammunition, and they can't always carry it on their back. So having these ATCs nearby with ammunition, not just M16 ammunition, but ammunition for 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns, very, very useful, grenades, etc. All the major towns in the Delta were easily accessible by river. Any place that the Viet Cong decided to show force, we could get to with the MRF. And the integration of the Navy and the Army. And in some cases we had regular mechanized infantry units working hand in hand together in battle situations. So excellent coordination between the two services. And I'll end this with a link to my book, which was published by the Government Printing Office. It is available in its entirety online for free. And you can, if you want to read it online. If you want a book, you can acquire the book at the Government Printing Office, gpo.gov. Thank you very much.